I'm Sarah Coates and you're watching I24 News. We begin in Gaza, where around 1,000 Palestinians are protesting near the border with Israel today, reportedly throwing rocks, with the Israel Defense Forces using riot dispersal methods as the Great March of Return demonstrations continue, more than a year now since they began. This, as the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, says the outcome of the elections here in Israel will not affect the plight of Palestinians, calling the vote a Zionist affair. Haniyeh going on to say that the differences between Israel's political parties are very marginal when it comes to policy toward Palestinians.
Our evaluation is that differences between parties over the core of the conflict with the Israeli occupation are very marginal. Lastly, we are people under occupation who will remain steadfast and continue demanding our rights, whoever wins or whatever the government from these elections bring inside an occupying entity. As an occupied Palestinian people, they don't matter to us.
Staying with elections, and Israel's north is composed of several different populations, Israeli Jews as well as Druze. Now, the Druze is a unique religious and ethnic minority who compose part of the Arab citizens in Israel. They can also be found in Jordan, Lebanon and Syria. In Israel's Golan Heights, some of them identify as Israeli and some Syrian. For the Israeli Druze and Jews that live there, they've some shared concerns, not least of which is security. Our defence correspondent Daniel Semach made a pre-election day visit up north to get a sense of what potential voters in these different groups are considering before election day on April 9.
Well, for many Israelis, before they go to the polls, they have a range of different priorities, whether it be social welfare services, education. But one issue is almost always a subject of debate, and that's security. Residents of northern Israel and the Israeli Golan Heights have had a first-hand look at the civil war in Syria, which is raging very close to Israel's doorstep, and at times even straying into Israeli territory. Iran and Israel have exchanged fire, and Hezbollah operatives were even seen setting up posts near the Israel-Syria border. So for these residents, the importance of security is clear.
It goes without saying that security is paramount. It plays a clear role. Security almost has a holy value here.
Other members of the Israeli Druze community of northern Israel seem to agree, or at least their leaders do.
If you look at the Druze leaders, the most talked about thing is the security. But if you look at the youth generation, we know how much we're good in security. So now our debate is more in the social aspect more than the security one. I'm talking about the new generation.
Elsewhere in the north, in Katsrin, a city known as the capital of Israel's Golan, the security issue is prioritized.
First of all, the security. I'm living up here in Golan, and we have had some incidents and sitting in the shelters, and I do hope that we will continue to attack Iran and don't let them close to us.
Not all voters are prioritizing security, but in areas where war and violence may be more familiar, the importance of keeping the border safe seems to resonate. Daniel Semach, I24 News.
Meanwhile, Member of Parliament Yair Lapid is in Paris and has met with French President Emmanuel Macron. The pair discussing the situation in the Middle East, the Iranian threat and the war on growing anti-Semitism in Europe. Before taking off, Lapid sounded optimistic about the prospects for his party, saying that if blue and white beat the ruling Likud by 4 or more seats in Tuesday's elections, then no power on earth will stop it forming the next coalition. There are new developments in the ongoing corruption probe surrounding Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The state comptroller has asked Israel's Attorney General to examine suspicions that Netanyahu gave false financial statements over the past decade. According to Israel's Channel 12 News, Yosef Shapira gave Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit the details after he found evidence of suspected criminal activities. The probe is tied to the so-called submarine affair, the largest suspected graft scandal in the country's history. Netanyahu's Likud party dismissing the news as more fabricated nonsense designed to skew the elections. Meanwhile, political allies of Prime Minister Netanyahu say they would not back a law giving the Premier immunity from prosecution. In a radio interview on Thursday, Netanyahu said, "I'm not dealing with it, and what's the truth?" when asked if he was against the so-called French law. Now, under the law, police would be barred from investigating corruption suspicions against a Prime Minister. Responses from political leaders are pouring in, with Naftali Bennett, who's the head of the New Right Party, and Yisrael Beitenu leader Avigdor Lieberman saying they're in favour of immunity legislation, but they wouldn't back a law which would retroactively apply to the Prime Minister. Now, is criticism of Israel and its policies toward Palestinians really just another form of anti-Semitism? Some 53% of Israelis think so. Now, that's one finding from a poll released recently by the German Konrad Adenauer Foundation and pollster Mitchell Barak. Now, in their wide-ranging poll, there were plenty of other interesting findings. Our senior international affairs correspondent Owen Alterman looks at a few of the highlights.
Israelis like the country's new nation-state law, but see Israel as giving all citizens equal rights. In focus groups, Israelis say they're worried about the Iran issue, but more about boycotts. And Israelis don't like the EU, but want Israel to join it. Those findings and more in a wide-ranging poll released last week by the German Konrad Adenauer Foundation and pollster Mitchell Barak. Let's take a look at a few of the poll's highlights. First, on the nation-state law. The controversial law passed last July that defined Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people. The poll found that 79% of Israeli Jews like the law, but more than two-thirds said citizens have equal rights, and not that Jews have supremacy.
So Israelis like to see their country as a democracy equal to all citizens, but yet it's a Jewish country, and they're very proud of that, and they feel that that is part and parcel of the state of Israel, and they don't think the two things are mutually exclusive.
Next, to what threatens Israel more? Iran's nuclear program or campaigns abroad to boycott and sanction Israel? In focus groups, more said boycotts.
There are people that believe that the boycott could destabilize the Israeli economy and Israel diplomatically. The Iranian threat, although Israelis are viewing it as a real strategic threat, Israelis do believe that they have the right tools in the Israeli army toolbox to fix that problem.
And on the European Union, a contradiction. Only 39% of Israelis have a favorable view of the EU, but 53% of Israelis say Israel should become an EU member.
Very often both the Israeli and many European governments play a good cop, bad cop game when it comes to Israeli-European relations. So my government, for example, is very good in stressing the positive sides between Israel and Germany.
All of that in a snapshot of Israeli public opinion. Owen Alterman, I-24 News.
Human rights lawyer Amal Clooney has spoken out on the sidelines of the G7 summit in France to try and shed light on the dangers of being a journalist in this day and age. Joined by British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, Clooney, who's been appointed as a special envoy on media freedom to try and counter laws which block journalists from carrying out their work.
We are here because it's never been more dangerous to report the news. According to the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, in the last 5 years, we've seen the highest number of journalists imprisoned than at any time since their records began almost 3 decades ago. The highest number as well of journalists who've been reported missing. And we also know of many situations where journalists are not just dying because they walk into conflict zones unarmed for the most part, but actually because they've been targeted for assassination for their work.
And we're going out for a short break, but when we come back, Syria is lashing out at Israel and Russia following the return of a soldier's body to Israel 37 years after he died. We'll tell you why right after this. Stay with us.
Politics, economics, business, and technology. Get the real news and the real insight about what's happening around the world. Michelle McCory breaks down the top stories of the day from the Middle East to the U.S. Weeknights beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern.
David, what should we lead with tonight? Iran, China, Russia, D.C.?
How about North Korea?
Well, on Crossroads, we usually cover them all. I'm Tal Heinrich.
And I'm David Schuster. Join us each night for hard-hitting interviews, detailed analysis,
and the most important information you need to know.
I'm Nurit Ben.
And I'm Kalev Ben David.
Join us right here on The Rundown for the global headlines defining the day.
Plus in-depth interviews and debates that take you inside the Middle East.
To the stories born out of this region and the massive impact they have all the way to Washington.
The Rundown on I-24 News.
Where the Middle East meets the world.
Every story has multiple layers, and with the fast-paced, constantly changing headlines, we take you deeper. Breaking down the day's main events from angles you might not expect. I'm Tracy Alexander. Join me for Perspectives.
Perspectives. There's more than just one view.
Welcome back. Let's go now to a developing story. And Syria is denying claims from Russian President Vladimir Putin that Damascus was involved in the recovery of the remains of an Israeli soldier who died in the First Lebanon War back in 1982. The body of Zachary Barmel was brought back here to Israel 2 days ago and buried yesterday, 37 years after he was killed in the Battle of Sultan Yaqub. Syria's state news agency Sana releasing a statement saying Syria has no clue about the Israeli soldiers' remains, adding that what happened is new evidence confirming cooperation between terrorist groups and Israeli intelligence. Staying in the Middle East, and US President Donald Trump says he plans to include in the so-called deal of the century understandings with Jordan on the citizenship of Palestinian refugees. That's according to a report in the Lebanese newspaper Al Akhbar. Now, that report adding that Jordan has been asked to take in around 1 million Palestinian refugees in several stages, the first being the largest, 300,000 refugees who'll become Jordanian citizens under the agreement. The deal of the century is the Trump administration's plan for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. It was supposed to be rolled out earlier this year, but has been postponed until after the general election in Israel on April 9. Now, there's been poll after poll on voter sentiment, but despite the numbers, there's a lot to be said about perhaps those who really have no idea who they'll vote for, and they count for about 10 to 12 seats, meaning the potential kingmakers of these elections. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Ellie Hockenberg went out onto the streets of Israel to get a feel for the uncertainty of Israeli voters.
We continue our election journey in the cultural and economic capital of Israel, the central city of Tel Aviv. So is it a bubble or a melting pot, a detached city, or one that reflects the greatest diversity? Does the Tel Avivian vote even exist? Tel Aviv is often dubbed a leftist hub, especially in the so-called liberal areas, the center, the northern neighborhoods. But why is that? What are the topics that get them out to the ballot box?
Politics is all theater. It's not boring, it's entertainment. And Bibi succeeds in that.
I'm not voting for Gant, I'm voting against Bibi. We need an alternative. It's about time that he will go away. It's like dividing the country and the people, and it has to be stopped. He's lying, he's humiliating other candidates. He feels like a king.
I would really want to see Netanyahu replaced. I am still debating who to vote for, but I think Meretz. They are the only ones talking about what they are doing and not smearing others, and also talking about issues of welfare and education.
I feel like 10 years is enough. I feel like it's time for a change, and I feel like it's not okay to have a prime minister who's most likely to be under indictment. My plan is to vote for whoever is in second place in the polls, and it's most likely they will be Benny Gantz and Kahol Lavan.
I really do not support Bibi. I am a social worker, and the social situation here is extremely alarming. And generally, the state of the state is concerning. Lots of violence and aggression. He's been in charge for too long, and it's time for change. Just a change.
Here in the southern neighborhoods, residents are not lacking in criticism over the government, especially when it comes to hot-button topics such as the African migrants, which locals here are claiming are only deepening the existing dire state. But not even long persisting disappointment will prevent them from voting for the right.
I choose Bibi, of course. Despite all the news and the politics, I don't care about it. He's the best. In economy and foreign relations with Arab countries, I like it.
I wish Bibi a great success in all, and God willing, he'll be elected and become prime minister. God forbid if Lapid and Gantz are prime ministers. Only Bibi.
Only Bibi. Why? Because everyone lives here like kings. And the country, there is corruption here and there. But you shouldn't get too hung up on that.
Only Netanyahu. Someone else? No. Netanyahu knows everything we need. If they can sit together in the coalition, then okay, but not one to replace him.
Only Bibi, no one else. All the haters can die. There's no criticism against him here, even if there are problems. It's not all Netanyahu. Someone is going to the bathroom and runs out of the toilet paper, they blame Bibi. In the entire world, they're taking a cigar here, a cigar there, so they caught Bibi. They have nothing else to do. No guns, no Lapid, no nothing. Only Bibi.
Bibi for sure. Why? There's no one better. What's wrong here? Nothing. All good. All the rest are inexperienced.
Israeli society is said to be more divided than ever before.
But here in Tel Aviv, left and right, rich and poor, hawks and doves are living side by side, not sparing any criticism, but also believe that with the right vote, it can only get better. Ellie Hochenberg, I-24 News.
Now to a developing story in Saudi Arabia has detained 8 people, including 2 dual US-Saudi citizens, in a new round of arrests targeting people who support women's rights and those with ties to jailed activists. Now, it marks the first sweep of arrests to target individuals perceived as critics of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman since the killing of writer Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in October. The Justice Department is defending Attorney General William Barr's handling of the Special Counsel's report on Russia. There have been recent reports that some on Robert Mueller's team feel that Barr's 4-page summary of Mueller's 400-page report was not adequate. Now, the Department of Justice says Barr's letter was never meant to be a full summary and that the report will be released after the redaction process. Not good enough for protesters who gathered in Times Square to say the release of the report. I-24 News correspondent Ariel Hickson was there.
You can hear the chanting happening right now. It's very energetic. Now, these demonstrations are happening across the country, pretty much demanding that the Attorney General release the report to Congress. Now, critics of President Trump have said that this report could have something suspicious in it, and because the Attorney General missed the April 2nd deadline, people are getting increasingly wary.
This is an outrage that these guys are withholding this document. It should have been released to them Monday morning. He got it Friday afternoon? Sure, take the weekend. He doesn't need to redact it for them. They see top secret stuff all the time.
Now, here in New York, people are pretty much communicating that the American people have a right to the report and that secrecy is not okay. Now, we'll see in the upcoming days if the government has any response to these mass protests and if the Attorney General decides to change his ways.
Now to some military news coming out of the United States, and a military son is stepping up to honour his father's final wish, starting a non-profit to help other veterans in the process.
It was a veteran father's dying wish to be draped in the American flag, but retired Army tank commander Mark Brown didn't want a pristine one.
He wanted one that was tattered and rugged and weathered just like he was.
Asking his son Zach, a retired Army sergeant, for a flag with history. Zach returning home from combat in Iraq with severe PTSD, starting a special nonprofit.
I started collecting these flags because even though they're tattered and worn, I still believe they have a mission. And same thing with veterans. Even though they're tattered and worn, you still have a mission.
Donating those flags to veterans' families. Mark in awe of his son's mission.
He was jokingly taught to me, "Will you save one of those tattered flags for me?" Of course, I said, "Of course, Pop. I'll save you a tattered flag."
And so Zach honored his father.
He was under the red, white, and blue, and it was just a really good feeling knowing that I was able to make that happen for him.
With a final embrace and the worn stars and stripes of Old Glory.
I just picture him looking down on me, smiling.
Now to the most expensive divorce settlement ever, the Bezos divorce between the Amazon founder and his ex-wife Mackenzie, who's walking away with more than $35 million in Amazon stock. Janai Norman reports.
This morning, Mackenzie Bezos is waking up the fourth wealthiest woman on the planet.
Jeff in the corner, please.
This after she and now ex-husband Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, reached a record divorce settlement as they dissolved their 25-year marriage. Mackenzie will keep 25% of their joint Amazon stocks, with her share currently worth about $36 billion. Mackenzie breaking the news on her brand new Twitter account, writing, "Grateful to have finished the process of dissolving my marriage from Jeff with support from each other. Happy to be giving him all of my interest in the Washington Post and Blue Origin and 75% of our Amazon stock, plus voting control of my shares." She now ranks only behind L'Oreal heiress Francois Betancourt Myers, Alice Walton of the Walmart family, and Jacqueline Badger Mars of the Mars Candy family. Meanwhile, Bezos still retains the title of world's richest person, boasting a net worth of more than $110 billion. The two first met at a Manhattan hedge fund after Jeff graduated from Princeton, their offices right next to each other.
Through the walls, I would hear him laughing, that giant laugh, all day long. And it was totally love at first listen.
They got engaged in just 3 months, married within 6 months, moved to Seattle, staying in this small home while launching Amazon, raising their 4 kids. Bezos posting his own statement about his ex-wife on Twitter, saying, "I'm grateful for her support and for her kindness in this process." The news coming just 3 months after the former power couple first announced they were splitting up. That announcement soon followed by explosive accusations in the National Enquirer about an affair between Bezos and Lauren Sanchez, the tabloid releasing intimate messages between the pair.
Now for entertainment news, and reporter Jason Nathanson is tracking the latest headlines out of Hollywood.
Are you back?
Back from where?
Stephen King's classic horror tale of evil and ancient burial grounds is coming back to life this weekend for more scares.
Sometimes dead is better.
Pet Sematary opens nationwide today alongside the superhero flick Shazam. About a 14-year-old who shouts that one word to become the adult crime fighter.
She looked at me like I was some kind of monster.
And Taraji P. Henson and Sam Rockwell team up in The Best of Enemies, a historical drama about the unlikely friendship between a civil rights activist and a local Ku Klux Klan leader. Celine Dion's finishing up her residency in Las Vegas in June, but she's not slowing down, announcing a new album and world tour starting in September.
I'm not bringing the Vegas show on tour. That would be like easy. To be part of that creativity for me is like, wow.
Now you official now, but you got a soul to say.
Following the tragic death of Grammy-nominated rapper Nipsey Hussle this week, his music has taken off. Nielsen Music reported that 2,000 copies of his albums were purchased the day he died, followed by 9,000 copies on Monday and 4,000 copies on Tuesday. On Wednesday, Hussle's major label debut album, 2018's Victory Lap, was also #1 on the iTunes albums chart.
And finally, here's a story that just goes to show you're never too old to play competitive sport. Isaac Hayek, an Israeli man who's about to turn 74, has broken a Guinness World Record to become the oldest living soccer player, taking a field as a keeper. Now, his family was among the tens of thousands of Iraqi Jews who fled to Israel in the mid-20th century, with Hayek telling reporters he's ready for another game.
I'm here today on behalf of Guinness World Records to officially adjudicate a Guinness World Records title for the oldest active football player. Itzhak Hayek was born in 1945 and he today will be in goal. At the end of the match we'll be able to make a decision whether or not Itzhak Hayek is officially the oldest active football player.
And that is all we have time for this edition of I24 News, but we are continuing to bring you all of the breaking stories, so do go ahead and visit us online. That's i24news.tv. I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for watching.